Greetings, I'm Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, a member of the Ukrainian caucus in the United States Congress, and as well a participant in the OSCE. It is an honor to speak before you at such a historic event. I would first like to thank Chairman Wilson and Co-Chair Cardin for putting together this remarkable and historic program. For the first time, Courtroom 600 at Nuremberg's Palace of Justice is being used to tell the story of the modern-day millions of Ukrainians who have fallen victim to the atrocities of Vladimir Putin. It is fitting that this room was chosen as the place to discuss the Russian crimes against Ukraine's children, women, and children and civilians, because it was here that after World War II ended, Nazi war criminals, as they should have been, were brought to justice. In this room, in front of the International Military Tribunal, between November 20, 1945 and October 1st, 1946, leaders of the Nazi regime answered for the deadliest and most destructive war in human history, which claimed between 40 and 50 million lives and displaced tens of millions of the people that were loved by their loved ones. Today, the world is facing a similar threat. February 24th will mark 2 years since Russia launched an unprovoked and premeditated war against Ukraine. I was here in the region with the OSCE in Lithuania, and we had hoped, and yes, even prayed, that the war would not take place, that the attack would not take place. But yet, in an attack on democracy and a grave violation of international law, global peace, and security, Russia did attack violently, vehemently, Ukraine. According to the United Nations Refugee Agency, as of January 2024, there are an estimated 3.2 million internally displaced people in Ukraine, 5.9 million refugees from Ukraine globally, and 14.6 million Ukrainian people in need of humanitarian assistance. These reports are simply horrifying. I'm proud to be a voice for the voiceless and to shine a light on the atrocities committed against Ukrainians, in particular Ukrainian children, and to join with my fellow congressional colleagues in our outrage, in our committed, spirited advocacy that this will stop, and we will fight to protect the children. Ukraine's Office of the Prosecutor General has confirmed more than 17,000 cases of Ukrainian children abducted to Russia, but the numbers are likely much higher. Russia does not give us the facts, but they are known violently to steal these innocent, precious souls. The United States State Department has said it has reliable information that Russian authorities have deliberately separated Ukrainian children from their parents during so-called filtration procedures and abducted others from Ukrainian institutions before putting them up for adoption inside Russia, and estimates that the number may be as high as 260,000 precious souls stolen from their heritage and their families. This is only the first step in what appears to be a deliberate Russian policy. Once Ukrainian children arrive in Russia or in Russia-controlled parts of Ukraine, they are put into Russian orphanages. I would call them detention cells, jails, where they cannot get out and or communicate with any of their family members. Can you imagine the fear of these precious souls? After a short period, they are given Russian citizenship, and in May of 2022, Putin signed a decree streamlining the process for children to receive Russian citizenship and for adoption, really to the advantage of the Russian people and to Vladimir Putin, not for the safety of these children, not for the love of these children, but to take advantage of these innocent innocent children who have no other out, no other refuge, no other way to address their pain. In Russian custody, Ukrainian children are subjected to re-education programs meant to Russify them, told that their parents no longer wanted them, and convinced that their future lies in Russia. Just think for a moment to be told as an innocent child that your loving parents that you remember from birth no longer want you, no longer care for you. How cruel, how venomous, how horrible. We must stop this. In addition, almost 2/3 of the country's children have been placed according to the United Nations, and disruptions to education may never be fully recovered. In this regard, I would like to recognize the Ukrainian government exceptional campaign to keep children linked to their schools by mobilizing the remote learning infrastructure built up during the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the many European countries which have opened their schools to Ukrainian refugee children. Children and their families need support to deal and to heal with the trauma they have experienced. Thankfully, there are organizations on the ground providing psychological treatment, art therapy, humanitarian aid, and for some, even new homes. We all need to support such programs and to act now to ensure their continued action and expanded reach. The longer children go without receiving treatment for their trauma, the longer it will take to heal them, and they will turn into broken adults, wondering why they were abandoned and why they were left without love and nurturing. There is also significant concern for the physical, mental, and psychological well-being of women in Ukraine. Amnesty International reports that women in this country face grave risks, increased burden of carrying responsibilities, and immense stress and hardships when living in war zones. Amnesty International Secretary General explains that time and time again, women bear their brunt of the war's brutality, and they never get from under it. They are consistently on the front lines of conflict as soldiers and fighters, doctors and nurses, volunteers, peace activists, carers for their communities and families, and carers for their own families, internally displaced people, refugees, and too often as victims and survivors, and many times victims and survivors of rape. Women confront increased sexual and gender-based violence and perilous health conditions while being forced to make life and death survival decisions for their families. At the same time, women are often excluded from decision-making processes, and their rights and needs remain unprotected and unmet. While many women in Ukraine have joined the resistance to Russian aggression, very often caregiving responsibilities for children and family members fall disproportionately on women. Managing these caregiving responsibilities is especially difficult in the perilous conditions of the conflict. The invasion has also had a direct detrimental effect on women's mental, physical, and sexual and reproductive health. Can you imagine what they are experiencing? I'm especially concerned about reports of rape and assault committed to Russian troops, and not only of women, but also of children and men. Gender-based violence is aggravated and intensified for those living in the conflict-affected areas. Russia must be held accountable for their heinous actions and the war crimes they have committed against the women, children, people of Ukraine. They kill their own opposition. They care about nothing. They don't even want the voices of opposition against Vladimir Putin to be able to speak. And of course, now they want to take out the precious souls, the very precious souls of opposition to their horrible form of government. I urge Congress to act to protect the safety, security, and well-being of the people of Ukraine, especially vulnerable populations like women and children. I urge the passing of the funding that is so desperately needed. Congress cannot remain complicit in the face of Russian aggression. We must act to defend the rights and freedoms of Ukraine's children and all its people. That's why I introduced the legislation to support the children of Ukraine from Russian aggression and to prevent human trafficking in refugee flows, joined by my co-sponsor, Congressman Chair Joe Wilson. I thank him for his enormous leadership and our partnership together. On February 26, 2022, we found that a family was driving from Kyiv to the suburb of Busha with her grandson when Russian forces opened fire on their car, killing her grandson. Although wounded herself, she was able to drive to a medical clinic where her grandson was formally declared dead. This act is dedicated to the family and all children and families of Ukraine who are suffering serious injury and trauma during Russia's unjustified, brutal, cruel, and genocidal war against Ukraine. According to a report by Yale University Humanitarian Research Lab, at least 6,000 from Ukraine, 6,000 children from Ukraine ages 4 months to 17 years have been held at camps and other facilities within Russia-occupied crimes and mainland Russia since Russia's full-scale invasion. There are at least 43 camps and facilities where the government has these children. Among the camps identified by Yale HRL, at least 78% of the camps seem to be ravaged, engaged in organized re-education processes, turning these children into Russians, getting them ready to fight a war. In response to this heartbreaking situation, again, we introduced legislation to protect these children. As a member of the Ukraine caucus and a longtime fighter for those who seek to live in a fair, just, and democratic society, I will continue to push for legislation that sanctions the actions of individuals responsible for kidnapping Iranian children. The sanctions include the blocking of property and blocking visas, admission, or parole in the United States. We will stop them. We will stop them. Today I call for my colleagues action to act and to ask that they join me in seeking liberty and justice for all those in Ukraine, that we stand by those fighting for democracy, the men and women, that we bust open the detention centers holding Ukrainian children in Russia and set them free to go back to their families and to be at peace in a peaceful, democratic Ukraine. We need to act now to stop the abduction and forced assimilation of Ukrainian children to Russia. We must be fighters, standing alongside of the Ukrainian people against the Russian tyranny. We have to be freedom fighters, and we must give comfort to the Ukrainian people. My thoughts and prayers are with the Ukrainian people during their darkest hour, but we must say to them that you're not alone in this moment of stolen children, of brutality and genocide. You are not alone. America stands with Ukraine and the Ukrainian people now and forever.